The day Margaret Taylor threw my clothes onto the front lawn was the day I stopped being just Amelia Williams, jewelry designer, and became something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose. "You trapped my son," she hissed, her perfectly manicured hand pointing accusingly at me while Ryan stood behind her, arms folded. "Now we're taking back what's ours." I should have been devastated. After all, they had orchestrated everything. The fake evidence of an affair, the secret bank transfers, the public humiliation. 3 years of marriage reduced to a sidewalk eviction. Instead, I felt oddly calm as I reached for the document they hadn't bothered to understand. The prenup with the clause Ryan himself had insisted on. I watched the color drain from their faces as reality dawned. They thought they were ending my story that day. They were only beginning it. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special. Episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. I remember the day I opened my first storefront like it was yesterday. The smell of fresh paint, the gleam of the new display cases, and that handwritten grand opening sign I'd stayed up all night perfecting. 10 years of saving every penny, working 3 jobs, and sleeping on a friend's couch had led to this moment. Williams Custom Designs. My name, my vision, my freedom. "You really did it, Amelia," my best friend Jessica said, squeezing my hand. "From making jewelry in your bedroom to this." I smiled, fighting back tears. My mom would have been proud. That was 4 years ago. Now my boutique jewelry business had expanded to 3 locations across the city, with celebrities wearing my designs, and fashion magazines featuring my work. I had come a long way from the trailer park where I grew up, the daughter of a single mother who worked herself to exhaustion to keep food on our table. I never expected to fall in love during this journey. Building my business had consumed every waking moment. Dating wasn't even on my radar, until Ryan Taylor walked into my flagship store one rainy Tuesday afternoon. "I need something special," he said, shaking raindrops from his perfectly styled dark hair. His blue eyes crinkled as he smiled, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, that flutter of immediate attraction. "It's my sister's 30th birthday, and apparently the traditional jewelry store offerings aren't cutting it." I showed him several pieces, watching as he studied each one with genuine interest. "These are incredible," he said, picking up a sapphire pendant. "Did you design all of these?" "Every single one," I replied, unable to hide the pride in my voice. "A beautiful woman with talent to match," he said, that charming smile making another appearance. "Would it be inappropriate if I asked you to dinner after I buy this necklace for my sister?" Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. The way he casually dropped mentions of his family's vacation homes in Aspen and Martha's Vineyard. The surprised look when I wouldn't let him pay for every dinner. The subtle comments about how impressive it was that I'd built my business all on my own. But I was too enamored with his charisma, with the way he made me laugh, with how he seemed to see me, really see me, beyond my success. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just Amelia Williams, the girl who fought her way out of poverty, through sheer force of will. I was simply Amelia, a woman being courted by a man who seemed too good to be true. And he was. The first crack in the perfect facade appeared 3 months into our relationship when Ryan mentioned his mother wanted to meet me. "She's excited to meet the woman who's captured my heart," he said over dinner at my place. I'd cooked his favorite, steak with roasted potatoes. "I'd love to meet her too," I replied, refilling his wine glass. His expression shifted so slightly I almost missed it. "Just don't take anything she says personally. Mom can be a bit protective." Protective was an understatement. Margaret Taylor lived in a sprawling colonial in the wealthiest suburb of Boston. The house screamed old money, from the perfectly manicured hedges to the antique furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. "So you're the jewelry maker," she said by way of greeting, her eyes traveling from my simple dress to my sensible heels with thinly veiled disapproval. "Designer," Ryan corrected, placing his hand on my lower back. "Amelia owns 3 stores now." "How enterprising," Margaret replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It must be so fulfilling to have a little business to keep you busy." Throughout dinner, Margaret peppered me with questions about my background, each one designed to highlight the gulf between her world and mine. "And where did you attend university, Amelia?" she asked, delicately cutting into her roast duck. "I didn't," I answered honestly. "I started working right after high school to support myself." "How resourceful," she replied with a tight smile. "It's rare to see self-made women these days. Most prefer to marry well." Ryan squeezed my hand under the table. "Amelia's the most hardworking person I know, Mom." "Of course she is, darling," Margaret said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That's what makes her so unique." Later that night, as Ryan drove us back to my apartment, I finally voiced what had been bothering me all evening. "Your mother doesn't approve of me," he laughed, reaching for my hand. "Don't mind her. She's the same with everyone I date. She'll warm up to you." But she never did. As our relationship progressed, Margaret's disapproval became more overt. She'd call Ryan while we were together, manufacturing emergencies that required his immediate attention. She'd send him links to articles about gold-digging women with pointed comments about knowing who to trust. During holiday gatherings, she'd seat me far from Ryan, next to distant relatives who didn't know what to make of me. Despite Margaret's interference, Ryan proposed after a year of dating. He did it at sunset on the beach, with champagne and roses, the perfect picture book moment. "I've never met anyone like you," he said, down on one knee, diamond ring glittering in the fading light. "You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be better. Marry me, Amelia." I said yes through tears of joy, believing that our love was strong enough to overcome his mother's disapproval. I was wrong about that too. 2 weeks after our engagement, Ryan broached the subject of a prenuptial agreement. "It's not that I don't trust you," he quickly added, seeing my expression. "It's just a formality. My family has certain expectations." "Your mother, you mean?" I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, it protects both of us. You have your business to think about, too." I considered this. My business was my life's work, and protecting it made sense. "Okay," I agreed. "We'll both get lawyers and do this properly." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you for understanding. And honestly, once we're married, Mom will come around. She just needs time." The prenup negotiations were surprisingly straightforward. Ryan seemed unconcerned with the details, focusing instead on our lavish wedding plans. He insisted on a ceremony at his family's country club with hundreds of guests, most of whom I had never met. "Don't worry about the cost," he assured me, when I expressed concern about the growing expense. "This is our special day." What I didn't realize then was that he assumed I would be covering most of those costs. The first hint came when the initial payments were due for the venue and catering. "Can you transfer the money today?" Ryan asked casually over breakfast. "They need the deposit." I paused, coffee mug halfway to my lips. "I thought your family was handling the venue since it's their country club." A flash of annoyance crossed his face. "Well, yes, but we're getting a deal. I figured since you're doing so well with your business." I paid the deposit, and the florist, and the band. Each time Ryan had some excuse about temporary cash flow issues or investments that hadn't matured yet. Margaret, meanwhile, took control of every wedding detail, from the color scheme to the menu. "Darling, I've been planning Ryan's wedding since he was born," she told me with a brittle smile when I suggested a different cake flavor. "Trust me, I know what's best." The wedding itself was a blur of fake smiles and stiff conversations. I felt like an actress in someone else's play, reciting lines in a story that didn't belong to me. The one genuine moment came during our vows, when Ryan looked into my eyes and promised to love me forever. I believed him then. Our honeymoon in Bali was magical at first. We stayed in a private villa overlooking the ocean, spent our days exploring ancient temples, and our nights tangled in each other's arms. But even in paradise, reality began to intrude. "Let's get another bottle of champagne," Ryan suggested one evening as we watched the sunset from our terrace. "We already ordered one," I reminded him. "I know, but let's splurge," he grinned, signaling the butler before I could respond. When the bill came at the end of our stay, I noticed he had charged everything to my credit card. The champagne, the couple's massages, even the souvenirs he bought for his mother. "I thought we were splitting costs," I said, reviewing the statement. Ryan kissed my cheek. "We will. I just need to move some money around when we get home. Besides, you're the one with the successful business. What's the point of all that hard work if you can't enjoy it with your husband?" The comment stung, but I brushed it aside. Marriage was about partnership, about give and take. If I was giving a little more right now, surely things would balance out over time. They never did. Within months of our wedding, a pattern emerged. Ryan would start business ventures, a tech startup, an import-export company, a restaurant concept, with grand promises about returns on investment. He'd work intensely for a few weeks, then lose interest when the initial excitement wore off. Each failure was someone else's fault. Unreliable partners, market conditions, bad timing. Meanwhile, my business continued to thrive. I opened a 4th location and launched an online store that quickly exceeded sales projections. The more successful I became, the more Ryan resented it, though he never hesitated to enjoy the lifestyle my success provided. Margaret's influence grew stronger by the day. She called Ryan constantly, often showing up at our home unannounced with some crisis that needed his attention. She needed help redecorating her living room. Her car was making a strange noise. She couldn't figure out her new phone. Each problem required Ryan's immediate response. "She doesn't have anyone else," he would say defensively when I expressed frustration. "She's my mother, Amelia." I tried to be understanding. I had lost my mother to cancer when I was 21. I knew the pain of that void. But Margaret had plenty of friends, a full social calendar, and more than enough money to hire help when needed. What she wanted wasn't assistance. It was control over her son, and by extension, over me. As my 2nd year of marriage began, I noticed Ryan's behavior changing. He started coming home late, sometimes smelling of alcohol. He became secretive about his phone, taking calls in another room. His spending increased. Designer clothes, a new watch, weekend trips with the guys that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. "Where is all this money coming from?" I finally asked after he came home with a brand new golf set. "Your last venture folded 3 months ago." "I have investments," he replied vaguely. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry. As the financial manager of a successful business, I knew the numbers weren't adding up. One evening, while Ryan was at yet another dinner with his mother, I decided to check our joint account, only to discover a series of large withdrawals I couldn't account for. That night, as I lay awake listening to Ryan's even breathing beside me, a cold realization settled in my chest. The man I married was not the man I thought he was. The question was, who was he really? And what was he hiding? The first concrete evidence that something was seriously wrong came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Ironically, the same kind of day. I first met Ryan. I was reviewing our quarterly tax documents when I noticed discrepancies in our joint account. Over the past 6 months, nearly $50,000 had been withdrawn in increments just small enough to not immediately trigger my attention. My hands trembled as I traced the money's path. The transfers led to an account I didn't recognize. One opened at a different bank 18 months ago, right around the time we got engaged. The account holder? Margaret Taylor. My stomach lurched. I thought back to all the times Ryan had claimed to be helping his mother with various financial issues. Was this what he meant? Taking our money, my money, and funneling it to Margaret? I wanted to confront him immediately, but years of building a business had taught me the value of strategy. I needed more information before making my move. The next morning, after Ryan left for his latest venture, a consulting position at a friend's firm, I called Matthew Wilson, a private investigator I'd hired previously to check on a supplier. I suspected of selling counterfeit materials. "I need surveillance on my husband," I said when we met at a coffee shop far from my usual haunts. The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth. Matthew didn't bat an eye. "Suspected infidelity?" "Possibly," I replied. "But I'm more concerned about financial impropriety. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. To Ryan, I was the same supportive wife, listening to his complaints about work, making his favorite meals, responding to his increasingly infrequent physical advances. But inside, I was a woman waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Thursday when Matthew called requesting an urgent meeting. "Your husband isn't having an affair, at least not the kind you might expect," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "But you were right about the financial concerns." The folder contained photos of Ryan entering a law office on 3 separate occasions. The firm specialized in divorce and asset division. There were also photos of Ryan and Margaret having lunch, their heads bent together over documents, their expressions intense. "I managed to get close enough during one of their meetings to hear snippets," Matthew continued. "They were discussing divorce strategy. Specifically, how to maximize his claim on your business assets. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I was working 16-hour days to grow our life together, my husband was plotting to take half of everything I'd built." "There's more," Matthew said grimly. "Your mother-in-law has been making calls to several of your close friends and business associates. She seems to be fishing for information about your personal life. Anything that could be used against you." I thought of Margaret's saccharine smile, her constant undermining, her thinly veiled contempt for my success. She had never accepted me, never believed I was good enough for her precious son. And now she was actively working to destroy me. "Thank you," I said to Matthew, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Keep following them. I need to know their entire plan before I make my move." That night, as Ryan and I sat through another silent dinner, I studied him with new eyes. The charming mask he'd worn when we met had slipped enough for me to see the emptiness behind it. How had I missed it for so long? "Mom asked us over for dinner this Sunday," he said, scrolling through his phone instead of looking at me. "Some of her friends from the club will be there. She wants you to wear that blue dress she bought you for Christmas." The dress I'd never worn because it was 2 sizes too small. Margaret's subtle dig at my figure. "I have inventory to do on Sunday," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. Annoyance flashed across his face. "Can't someone else handle it? Mom went to a lot of trouble planning this." "I'm sure she did," I murmured. "But the business, he interrupted, throwing down his napkin. "That's all you care about lately." I raised an eyebrow. "That business pays for this house, Ryan, and your golf membership, and your mother's new kitchen renovation." He flushed. "I contribute." "Do you?" I asked mildly. "How's the consulting going?" Pushed back from the table. "I don't need this right now. I'm going out." After he left, I sat in the quiet kitchen, my mind racing. I needed to know exactly what they were planning. And for that, I needed access to Ryan's communications with his mother and their lawyer. The next day, I hired a tech specialist recommended by Matthew. For a considerable sum, he installed monitoring software on our home network that would give me access to Ryan's emails and text messages. It wasn't strictly legal, but neither was what Ryan and Margaret were planning. What I discovered over the next few days made my blood run cold. Ryan and Margaret weren't just planning a divorce. They were plotting character assassination. They planned to claim I had been unfaithful, making me the villain in our marriage's demise. Under our prenup, infidelity would significantly reduce my financial protection. "We just need evidence," Ryan had written to his mother. "Photos, texts, anything that suggests she's been with someone else." Margaret's response chilled me. "Leave that to me, darling. I have connections who can ensure such evidence exists. They were going to fabricate proof of an affair I never had." My first instinct was fury. I wanted to confront them both, to rage at their betrayal. But the businesswoman in me knew better. They had underestimated me from the beginning, seeing only what they wanted to see, a self-made woman who would be easy to manipulate and discard. It was time to use that misconception against them. So I pretended. I agreed to Sunday dinner at Margaret's, wearing a different dress that actually fit. I smiled through her backhanded compliments and Ryan's increasingly obvious disinterest. I acted oblivious to the glances they exchanged, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Meanwhile, I prepared. I met with my own lawyer, a shark in designer clothing named Diane Fellows. I showed her the prenuptial agreement, pointing out a clause Ryan had insisted on including, one I now realized he had never actually read carefully. Well, Diane said, a slow smile spreading across her face. He really didn't understand what he was signing, did he? Apparently not, I replied. And I need that to remain our advantage. I moved most of my assets into protected accounts that Ryan couldn't access. I gathered every financial record from our marriage, creating a paper trail of his withdrawals and Margaret's involvement. I made copies of the evidence Matthew had, collected, storing them in multiple secure locations. And then I waited for them to make their move. It came sooner than expected. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Had a great time last night. When can I see you? Again? Minutes later, another. You left your earring in my car. I'll bring it next time. They weren't even being subtle about it. I showed the messages to Matthew, who traced them to a burner phone purchased at a convenience store near Margaret's house. They're setting up the paper trail, he explained. Next will probably be photos. He was right. 3 days later, Ryan received an envelope with no return address. Inside were photos of me, with a man I'd never seen before. The images were grainy and clearly manipulated, my face pasted onto another woman's body. But to someone who wanted to believe them, they might look convincing enough. That night, Ryan was unusually attentive, suggesting we open a bottle of wine and watch a movie together. His sudden interest made me sick to my stomach, but I played along, wondering what his next move would be. I've been thinking, he said casually as we sat on the couch, not quite touching. Maybe we should talk about our future. What about it? I asked, taking a small sip of wine. Well, we've been going in different directions lately. Your business takes up so much of your time. He trailed off, gauging my reaction. I kept my expression neutral. That's not new, Ryan. My business has always been demanding. He nodded, looking thoughtful. I know. And I've been supportive, haven't I? But sometimes I wonder if we still want the same things. The conversation was so transparent it was almost laughable. He was testing the waters, seeing if I would suggest divorce first and make his job easier. What things do you think we don't want anymore? I asked, my voice deliberately vulnerable. He reached for my hand, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I don't know. Kids, maybe? We used to talk about starting a family. We had, in the beginning, before I realized that Ryan saw children as accessories, not responsibilities. Before I understood that any child we had would have Margaret as a grandmother, constantly interfering and undermining my parenting. I still want children. I lied smoothly. With you. Conflict flashed across his face. This wasn't going according to his script. Really? Even with how busy you are? We could make it work, I insisted, squeezing his hand. If we both really wanted it. He withdrew his hand, reaching for his wine glass. Let's not rush into anything. We have time to figure it all out. After he went to bed that night, I received a text from Matthew. They met with the lawyer again today. Things are accelerating. I knew then that I needed to finalize my preparations. Whatever they were planning, it would happen soon. I gathered all my documentation, made sure my lawyer was on standby, and steeled myself for the confrontation to come. The final piece fell into place when I overheard Ryan on the phone with Margaret late one night. It has to be this weekend, he was saying in a low voice. The evidence is in place, and I've talked to the security company about changing the locks afterward. And you're sure about the prenup? Margaret's voice was faintly audible through the speaker. Yes, Mother, Ryan replied, impatience edging his tone. In case of infidelity, I get to keep the house and half her business assets. It's all there in black and white. I slipped away silently, my heart pounding. They were planning to lock me out of my own home after accusing me of cheating. They thought the prenup would leave me with nothing while they took everything I'd worked for. What they didn't know was that I had one final card to play, the original prenuptial agreement with the clause Ryan had insisted on, but clearly never read carefully. The clause that stated in case of divorce initiated by him, he would leave with only his personal belongings and his own name. As I prepared for bed that night, watching Ryan pretend to sleep beside me, I felt an odd sense of calm. For nearly 3 years, I had tried to be the wife he wanted, the daughter-in-law Margaret would accept. I had compromised, accommodated, and forgiven, all while building my business and our life together. But no more. When their trap sprung, I would be ready with one of my own. I woke up Saturday morning to an empty bed. Ryan had left early, claiming he needed to meet a potential investor. Another lie. I knew exactly where he was, finalizing his plans with Margaret. Today was the day they would make their move. I dressed carefully in a cream silk blouse and tailored black pants. Professional. Confident. The armor I needed for what was coming. I applied my makeup with precision, making sure I looked perfect. This would be a performance after all. Around noon, I heard the crunch of tires on our driveway. Looking out the bedroom window, I saw Margaret's silver Mercedes pull up. Behind it was a moving truck. Subtle. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and headed downstairs. Amelia. There you are. Margaret's voice was falsely bright as she swept through the front door without knocking. She wore an expensive navy dress and pearls, as if she were attending a country club luncheon rather than orchestrating her son's divorce. I brought a few things for Ryan. Hope you don't mind. A few things that require a moving truck? I asked mildly. Her smile tightened. Just some furniture he's always loved. For his study. I nodded, playing along. How thoughtful. Ryan's not here at the moment. Oh? Well, he should be back soon. She glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch. Very soon. On cue, Ryan's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out looking grim and determined, clutching a manila envelope. The same expression he wore when starting one of his doomed business ventures. Mother, he acknowledged as he entered. You're early. Traffic was lighter than expected, she replied, her eyes darting between us. Ryan turned to me, his handsome face arranged in a mask of betrayal. Amelia, we need to talk. About what? I asked, keeping my voice steady. He threw the envelope onto the coffee table dramatically. About this. I didn't reach for it. What is it, Ryan? Why don't you open it and see for yourself? His voice, Had an ugly edge I'd heard more frequently over the past year. I opened the envelope and pulled out the photos I'd already seen. The poorly photoshopped images of me with a stranger. I studied them calmly, then looked up. What are these supposed to be? Don't insult my intelligence, Ryan snapped. You've been cheating on me. Margaret moved to stand beside her son, a united front of righteous indignation. We have text messages too, she added, and hotel receipts. I set the photos down carefully. These are fake, and you both know it. Deny it all you want, Ryan said, his voice rising. The evidence speaks for itself. He pulled out his phone, showing me the staged text messages. Explain these, Amelia. Explain how this man knew what earrings you were wearing. I almost laughed at the amateurish attempt. The texts mentioned gold hoop earrings. I hadn't worn hoops in years, preferring the delicate studs from my own collection. Ryan, I said softly, do you really believe this? For a moment, something like doubt flickered in his eyes. Then Margaret placed her hand on his arm, and his expression hardened. I want you out of this house, he said coldly. Today, Margaret smiled, triumph glittering in her eyes. I've already called a few of the neighbors, she said. They should be here soon to help with the move. I thought it would be good to have witnesses. Of course she had. Margaret thrived on public humiliation, on controlling the narrative. She wanted me to be seen as the villain, the cheating wife being justly expelled from her son's life. I'm not leaving, I said calmly. This is my house too. Ryan's face reddened. Not according to the prenup. In case of infidelity, you forfeit your right to any shared property. I forced tears to my eyes, letting my voice waver. Ryan, please. You can't believe these lies. I've never cheated on you. I love you. The pretended vulnerability had its intended effect. Seeing me break down emboldened them, made them feel more powerful, more certain of their victory. Save the theatrics, Margaret snapped. We all know you only married Ryan for his connections. You never loved him. I buried my face in my hands, shoulders shaking as if I were sobbing. In reality, I was gathering myself for what came next. Need to start packing, Ryan continued, his voice gaining confidence. Take your personal belongings and go. Margaret moved toward the stairs. I'll help you, shall I? Make sure you don't take anything that isn't yours. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. The neighbors Margaret had invited to witness my shame, no doubt. Ryan answered, ushering in Linda and Bob Peterson from across the street, along with the Hamiltons from next door. What's going on? Linda asked, looking confused but intrigued. Margaret said you needed help with something urgent. We're helping. Amelia move out, Margaret announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. It seems she's been unfaithful to my son. The neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances. I had always been friendly with them, bringing homemade cookies at Christmas, helping Linda when she broke her ankle last winter. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Ryan, Bob said awkwardly, clapping him on the shoulder. Ryan nodded gravely. It's been a shock, but I'm dealing with it. Margaret seized the moment, dragging one of my suitcases down from the attic. She began throwing my clothes into it, not bothering to fold anything. You won't need much where you're going, she said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Cheap hotels don't require fancy clothes. I continued my act, pleading with Ryan as Margaret paraded more of my belongings downstairs. My jewelry designs, my business documents, family photos. Please, I whispered to Ryan, making sure the neighbors could hear. Don't do this. We can work it out. There's nothing to work out, he replied coldly. You made your choice. Finally, when my belongings were scattered across the lawn and the neighbors were thoroughly uncomfortable, Ryan delivered his final blow. According to our prenup, you leave with nothing but your personal items, he declared. Your business assets, our savings, this house, it all stays with me. I glanced at the neighbors, silently registering their presence as witnesses to what was about to unfold. Then I straightened up, drying my non-existent tears. "Is that what you think the prenup says, Ryan?" I asked, my voice suddenly steady. He frowned, caught off guard by my change in demeanor. "Of course it does. Page 12, paragraph 3. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a folder, the original prenuptial agreement with both our signatures, properly notarized. "You might want to read it again," I said, opening to the relevant page. "Specifically, the clause you insisted on adding." Ryan snatched the document, skimming the text with growing confusion. "This isn't... It's exactly what you signed," I interrupted. "3 years ago, before our wedding, the clause states that in case of divorce initiated by you, you walk away with your personal belongings and your name, nothing more." Margaret rushed over, grabbing the document from her son's hands. "That's impossible. I reviewed this myself." "You reviewed a draft?" I corrected her. "Ryan made changes before the final version. He insisted on adding that clause to protect me in case he ever changed his mind about our marriage." His words, not mine. Ryan's face drained of color as the reality sank in. "That's not what I meant to. But it's what you signed," I finished for him. "The truth is, Ryan, you never bothered to read the final document carefully. You were too focused on planning our lavish wedding with my money." Margaret's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. "This is a forgery," she declared desperately. "It has to be." I smiled, feeling a wave of calm confidence wash over me. "The original is on file with the court. Feel free to check." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting their involvement in what was turning into a very different scene than they'd expected. "I think we should go," Linda murmured to her husband, tugging him toward the door. "Actually, I'd appreciate if you'd stay a moment longer," I said. "Since you've been brought here as witnesses, you might as well witness everything." I turned back to Ryan and Margaret, whose stunned expressions would have been comical under different circumstances. "You set out to destroy me today," I continued calmly. "To humiliate me, to take everything I've worked for. But you made 3 critical mistakes." I held up one finger. "First, you underestimated me. You saw what you wanted to see, a self-made woman who would be easy to manipulate and discard." A second finger joined the first. "Second, you got greedy. If you'd been content with simply ending our marriage, I might have let you walk away with something. Instead, you tried to frame me for infidelity." I raised a third finger. "And finally, you never bothered to understand the documents you signed. You were so certain of your own cleverness that you didn't do the basic work of reading what was in front of you." Margaret's face contorted with rage. "You manipulated him into signing that." "No, Margaret," I replied evenly. "Ryan suggested that clause himself. I simply didn't correct his misunderstanding of how it would apply. Much like you didn't correct his misunderstanding that your help was actually destroying his marriage." I turned to the neighbors who were watching with undisguised fascination. "I apologize that you were brought into this. Ryan's mother thought public humiliation would break me. She was wrong." Linda looked at me with newfound respect. "Do you need anything, Amelia? Just witnesses to what happened here today," I replied with a small smile. "In case there are any questions later." As the neighbors awkwardly excused themselves, I collected my scattered belongings from the lawn. Ryan remained frozen, staring at the prenup as if it might magically rewrite itself if he looked hard enough. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice hollow. "This is my house too." I shook my head. "Actually, it's not. The mortgage is in my name. I've made every payment. You contributed nothing." "I'll fight this," Margaret hissed, her perfect coif coming undone as she shook with fury. "We'll say you coerced him, that you committed fraud." I smiled, reaching once more into my bag. "I suspected you might say that." I withdrew a small recording device and pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room. Once we get her out, Ryan will control half her business assets. We'll never have to work again. Ryan's recorded voice followed. The prenup is clear. In case of infidelity, I get everything. I stopped the recording. I have hours of similar conversations. Would you like to hear more? Margaret lunged for the device, but I stepped back smoothly. Careful, Margaret. Assault won't help your position. You were spying on us? Ryan asked, aghast. I was protecting myself, I corrected him. After I discovered you were stealing from our joint account to fund your mother's lifestyle. His eyes widened. That was a loan. It was theft, I interrupted. And I have the bank records to prove it. $50,000 transferred to an account in Margaret's name. I glanced at my watch. Now, I believe you both came here today, planning to throw me out with nothing but my clothes. Instead, I'll give you 1 hour to pack your personal belongings and leave. Leave? Margaret sputtered. You can't make us leave. I can and I will, I replied calmly. This house belongs to me. You are now trespassing. If you're not gone in, 1 hour I'll call the police. Ryan shook his head, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. Amelia, please. We can talk about this. We can work something out. The time for talking was before you tried to destroy me, I said, my voice finally betraying a hint of the anger I felt. Now, the time for talking is over. Margaret recovered first. Her years of social manipulation had taught her to pivot when a situation turned against her. Her face transformed, the rage replaced by a trembling smile. Amelia, darling, she began, her voice honey-sweet. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We're family. We should talk this through like family. I almost admired her audacity. Less than 10 minutes ago, she had been gleefully throwing my belongings onto the lawn. Family? I repeated. You've made it clear from day one that I would never be family in your eyes, Margaret. That's not true, she protested. I've always... Stop. I held up my hand. Let's not add more lies to the pile. You saw me as nothing but a threat to your control over Ryan and his money. Money he doesn't actually have, by the way. Ryan stepped forward, his handsome face arranged in the contrite expression I'd seen after each of his failed business ventures. Amelia, I admit I made a mistake. But you can't throw away 3 years of marriage over one bad decision. One? I laughed without humor. Let's be clear about what happened. Here. You married me while planning to eventually take half my business. You stole from our joint account. You and your mother fabricated evidence to frame me for cheating, and today you tried to throw me out of my own home. I pointed to the door. 55 minutes left. Margaret's facade cracked again. You smug little nobody. Do you know who? We're in this town. Who'll believe your side of the story? Everyone, I replied simply. Because unlike you, I have evidence. I pulled out my phone and showed them my email screen. Bank statements showing Ryan's theft, recordings of your conversations, plotting against me. The photos you doctored, along with metadata proving they were manipulated. And statements from the private investigator I hired when I first suspected something was wrong. Ryan paled. You hired someone to follow me? I hired someone to protect me, I corrected. Just as I hired my own lawyer to review that prenup before you signed it. A step you apparently skipped. You knew, he whispered. You knew what I was doing all along. Not at first, I admitted. I trusted you, Ryan. I believed in our marriage. It took me too long to see what was happening. But once I did, I made sure I wouldn't be your victim. Margaret moved closer to me, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. Let's be reasonable, Amelia. What do you want? Money? A settlement? Name your price. I stepped back, maintaining distance from her. I already have everything I want, Margaret. My business, my home, my freedom from both of you. We'll contest the prenup, she insisted. We'll say Ryan wasn't of sound mind when he signed it. By all means try, I replied. But before you do, you might want to watch this. I pulled up a video on my phone, Ryan on our wedding day, laughing with his best man. I slipped in this crazy clause that if I ever divorce her, I walk away with nothing but my name, he boasted on the screen. She didn't even notice. Mom's gonna freak when she finds out, but who cares? It's not like I'll ever leave Amelia. And this way, she feels safe. I stopped the video, watching the blood drain from both their faces. Your best man sent me this last year. He thought I should know what kind of man I married. Ryan lunged forward, grabbing for my phone. Give me that. I stepped back quickly. Touch me, and I'll add assault to the police report. What police report? Margaret demanded, her voice rising in panic. The one I filed this morning, I replied calmly, detailing the financial fraud Ryan committed by transferring money from our joint account without my knowledge or consent. Ryan's face contorted with rage and fear. You wouldn't... I already did. I cut him off. The detective thought it was particularly interesting that most of the money went to your mother. They'll probably want to talk to both of you. Margaret clutched her pearl necklace, her knuckles white. This is absurd. It was a loan. Ryan was helping me with some temporary financial difficulties. $50,000 of financial difficulties? I raised an eyebrow. Taken without my knowledge from an account that was primarily funded by my business? I checked my watch again. 40 minutes left. I suggest you start packing. Ryan's lawyer betrayal came next. A text message alert on his phone that he automatically checked. His face crumpled as he read the screen. Problems? I asked mildly. James can't represent me anymore, he muttered. Says there's a conflict of interest. I nodded. That would be because he called me last week. Apparently he has ethical standards, unlike his client. He couldn't tell me specifics, but he suggested I review our financial accounts immediately. You turned my own lawyer against me? Ryan's voice cracked with disbelief. I didn't have to, I replied. You did that yourself when you asked him to help you commit fraud. Margaret's composure shattered completely. She grabbed the prenup from the coffee table and began tearing it to shreds, her perfectly manicured nails ripping through the pages. This means nothing, she shrieked. You manipulated him. You tricked him. That's a copy, I informed her calmly. The original is with my lawyer and digitally filed with the court. Destroy it if it makes you feel better. As paper fragments fluttered to the floor, I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Time is ticking. I suggest you focus on what you're taking with you. It's all you'll have left. Ryan seemed to deflate before my eyes, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Where am I supposed to go? I imagine your mother has room, I replied. After all, she brought a moving truck. Margaret was still frantically tearing papers, muttering about lawyers and appeals and family connections. Ryan moved toward her cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal. Mom, he said quietly. Mom, stop, it's over. His words only fueled her frenzy. It's not over. I won't let this nobody destroy us. Do you know how many judges I play tennis with? How many lawyers owe me favors? None that will risk their careers for you, I interjected. Especially once. They see the evidence. Ryan placed his hands on his mother's shoulders, forcing her to stop. Mom, please. You're making things worse. For a moment she stilled, looking up at her son with desperate eyes. Then she pulled away violently. This is your fault. If you had read the papers properly, if you hadn't added that stupid clause, we wouldn't be in this mess. The venom in her voice seemed to shock Ryan. He stepped back, hurt flashing across his face. You said it would work. You said the prenup would protect us. Of course I did, Margaret snapped. Because I assumed you weren't stupid enough to include a clause giving her everything. I watched their relationship fracture in real time. Years of manipulation and codependency crumbling under pressure. In any other circumstance, I might have felt pity. Instead, I felt only a cold satisfaction. 30 minutes, I announced, checking my watch again. Ryan turned to me, his expression suddenly earnest. Amelia, please. I know I made mistakes, but I did love you. At the beginning, it was real. I studied his face, the face I'd once thought I would wake up to for the rest of my life. Maybe it was, I conceded. But it doesn't matter anymore. We can start over, he pleaded, moving toward me. I'll get help. I'll cut ties with my mother if that's what it takes. I shook my head. There's nothing left to save, Ryan. You killed whatever we had the moment you decided to steal from me. A car pulled into the driveway. A police cruiser. Ryan and Margaret froze, watching as 2 officers approached the house. Mrs. Taylor? One of them asked, addressing me. Yes, I confirmed. Thank you for coming so quickly. We received your report this morning, the officer continued. Are these the individuals in question? I nodded. Ryan and Margaret Taylor. I've given them 1 hour to collect their personal belongings and leave the premises. The officers turned to Ryan and Margaret. We'd like to ask you both some questions about certain financial transactions. Margaret drew herself up, falling back on the social authority she'd wielded her entire life. This is a family matter, officers. There's been a misunderstanding. Fraud isn't a misunderstanding, ma'am, the officer replied firmly. We can discuss this at the station if you prefer. Ryan's shoulders slumped in defeat. We'll cooperate, he said quietly. Just let us get our things first. As the officers waited by the door, Ryan and Margaret moved through the house like ghosts, collecting clothes and personal items. I stood in the living room, watching as 3 years of my life were dismantled. When the hour was nearly up, Ryan approached me one last time, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I never meant for it to go this far, he said quietly. Yes, you did? I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. You just never thought you'd face consequences. He looked away first. What happens now? Now? You leave. The police will want statements about the missing money. After that, my lawyer will contact you about the divorce proceedings. And then, I shrugged. Then you figure out how to live with yourself. Margaret appeared, dragging a suitcase down the stairs. Her makeup was smeared, her perfect coif disheveled. She glared at me with undisguised hatred. This isn't over, she hissed as she passed. Yes, it is, I replied evenly. You lost, Margaret. The sooner you accept that, the easier it will be. The officers escorted them to the cruiser, taking preliminary statements before allowing them to leave in Margaret's Mercedes. The moving truck remained in the driveway, a monument to their failed scheme. As I closed the door behind them, silence settled over the house. My house. I leaned against the wall, finally allowing the emotions of the day to wash over me. Not grief or regret, but relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane, my lawyer. How did it go? I typed back, exactly as planned. They're gone. Her response came immediately. Congratulations. Freedom looks good on you. I looked around at the home I'd paid for, the life I'd built, the business I'd protected. Freedom did indeed look good, and it was just the beginning. The morning after I evicted Ryan and Margaret from my home, I woke up to silence. Beautiful, peaceful silence. No Ryan's passive-aggressive sighs. No phone calls from Margaret with emergencies that needed immediate attention. Just me, my thoughts, and the knowledge that I had survived their betrayal. I stretched out across the king-sized bed, savoring the space. Then I picked up my phone and made a call I'd been planning for weeks. Jason, it's Amelia Williams. I think I'm ready to tell my story. Jason Parker was a business journalist, known for his unflinching exposés on corporate fraud and corruption. I'd met him at a Chamber of Commerce event last year, and we'd kept in touch. He'd been interested in profiling my jewelry business before. Now I had a much more compelling story to offer. "I've been waiting for your call," he replied. "Coffee in an hour?" I met Jason at a quiet cafe downtown, away from the upscale neighborhoods, where Margaret's social circle congregated. For 2 hours, I laid out everything. The prenup manipulation, the financial theft, the fake cheating allegations, and yesterday's confrontation. I provided copies of bank statements, photos of the fake evidence they'd created, and transcripts of key conversations I'd recorded. "This is explosive," Jason said, reviewing my documentation. "You realize once this goes public, there's no going back?" I nodded, stirring my now cold coffee. "I know, but they tried to destroy me in public. They don't get to slink away and rebrand themselves as victims." His article went live 3 days later. Socialite's son and mother caught in elaborate fraud. Attempt against self-made entrepreneur. The headline alone sent shockwaves through Boston's tight-knit business community. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from friends, acquaintances, and even a few of Margaret's social circle, seeking to distance themselves from the scandal. Linda Peterson, my neighbor who had witnessed the confrontation, called first. "Amelia, I'm so sorry for what happened. If we had known what they were trying to do." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "Margaret manipulated everyone, not just Ryan." "Well, everyone's talking about it," Linda continued. "Margaret's been asked to resign from the garden club board, and the country club is reviewing Ryan's membership. I hadn't anticipated how quickly their social world would crumble, but I wasn't surprised. Boston's elite circles valued propriety above all else. Financial fraud and public scandal were unforgivable sins. By the end of the week, the consequences were piling up. Ryan called me in a panic late Friday night. "They fired me," he said without preamble when I answered. His voice was slurred. He'd clearly been drinking. "The firm says they can't have my controversy affecting their reputation." "That's unfortunate," I replied neutrally. "Unfortunate?" He laughed bitterly. "My life is ruined, Amelia. Are you happy now?" "I didn't ruin your life, Ryan. You did that yourself when you decided to steal from me." "It wasn't stealing," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "It was just borrowing. I was going to pay it back." "With what money?" I asked. "Your imaginary business success?" His silence confirmed what I'd always known. There had never been a plan to repay anything. In Ryan's world, my money was his by right of marriage. "I need help," he finally said. "I can't pay my rent without a job." "That sounds like something you should discuss with your mother." "Mom's dealing with her own problems," he muttered. "The bank is foreclosing on her house." That surprised me. "Already? How is that possible?" "She's been behind on payments for months," Ryan admitted. "The money I took was helping her stay afloat. Her lifestyle costs more than her divorce settlement provides." The pieces clicked into place. Margaret's desperation to get control of my business assets wasn't just about greed, it was about survival. Her own financial house of cards was collapsing. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and part of me genuinely was. No matter what Margaret had done, becoming homeless was a harsh fate. But that's not my problem to solve. "Please," Ryan begged, "just a loan to get me through until I find another job." "No," I said firmly. "Our financial relationship is over. The divorce proceedings will address any remaining obligations. Until then, I suggest you look into unemployment benefits." After hanging up, I sat in my quiet living room, processing this new information. Margaret's foreclosure explained the urgency of their scheme, the recklessness of their actions. They hadn't just wanted my money, they'd needed it. The next morning, I received a much less pleasant call from an unknown number. "You think you're so clever," Margaret hissed when I answered. "So proud of yourself for destroying us." "I didn't call the newspaper, Margaret," I lied smoothly. But I didn't hide the truth either. "No one will talk to me," she continued, her voice breaking. "My friends won't return my calls. The charity board asked me to step down. 40 years in this community, and I'm suddenly a pariah. Actions have consequences," I replied evenly. "Perhaps you should have considered that before trying to frame me for infidelity." "It was Ryan's idea," she said quickly. "He was desperate after losing that investment. I was just trying to help my son." The betrayal was so predictable I almost felt sorry for Ryan. Almost. "Throwing him under the bus won't save you, Margaret. The bank records show the money went to your account." "I'm going to lose my house," she whispered, finally dropping the anger for raw fear. "Everything I have. Where am I supposed to go?" For a moment I considered offering help. A small apartment, enough to keep her off the streets. But then I remembered her smug expression as she threw my clothes onto the lawn, her gleeful anticipation as she prepared to witness my humiliation. "That's not my concern," I said coolly. "Goodbye, Margaret." As the days passed, more details of their downfall reached me through Boston's efficient gossip network. Margaret had been seen begging former friends for loans, only to be politely but firmly rejected. Ryan had moved into a dingy studio apartment in a part of town his mother had previously described as unfit for civilized habitation. His BMW had been repossessed when he couldn't make the payments. The most surprising development came when Linda texted me a link to Ryan's new Instagram post, a lengthy, self-pitying screed portraying himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife. "I trusted someone who only saw me as a path to social acceptance," he wrote. "When I discovered her betrayal, she turned the tables and fabricated claims against me. Now I'm fighting to rebuild my life after losing everything." The post had exactly 12 likes and over 300 comments, most calling him out for his transparent attempt to rewrite history. "Didn't your mother help you try to frame your wife?" one commenter wrote. "The bank records don't lie, dude," added another. Within hours, Ryan had deleted the post, but the damage was done. His attempt at a redemption narrative had backfired, spectacularly, cementing his reputation as a fraudster and a liar. Margaret's public meltdown came next. Jessica called me one afternoon, her voice breathless with urgency. "Amelia, you need to see this. Margaret Taylor just had a complete breakdown at Wellston's." Wellston's was an upscale department store where Boston's elite shopped for designer clothes and accessories. Margaret had apparently been attempting to return items she could no longer afford when the manager refused her, likely due to her now tarnished reputation. "She started screaming about how you ruined her life," Jessica continued. "Knocking over displays, throwing merchandise. Security had to escort her out. Someone got it all on video. It's already trending locally." I found the video easily enough. Margaret, her appearance notably less polished than usual, screaming at a frightened sales associate. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That Williams woman destroyed my family. She's a manipulative, gold-digging nobody." As security guards approached, she grew more hysterical. "Everyone's abandoned us. 40 years of friendship, gone, all because of her." I closed the video, a complex mix of emotions swirling within me. I had wanted justice, wanted them to face consequences for what they'd done. But watching Margaret's public unraveling brought me no satisfaction. There was something deeply sad about seeing a person lose not just their material possessions, but their entire identity. That evening, as I sipped wine on my back patio, my phone rang again. Ryan. "I saw the video of Mom," he said quietly. "She's not well." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, and meant it. "She's staying with me now," he continued. "My place is barely big enough for one person. but she has nowhere else to go. I remained, silent, waiting for the inevitable request for money. "I'm not calling for help," Ryan surprised me by saying. I wanted to apologize, not for Mom's sake, but for mine. What we did was wrong." "Yes, it was," I agreed, not making it easier for him. "I did love you," he said, his voice catching. "At the beginning. But I was raised to believe I deserved success without earning it. When your business took off while mine failed, I couldn't handle it. And Mom, she's always controlled me through guilt and obligation." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I need to take responsibility," he replied. "The police investigation, the divorce, I won't fight any of it. You deserve a clean break." For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a flicker of respect for Ryan. "Thank you for that. One more thing," he added. "I'm sorry about the prenup, but I really did add that clause to make you feel secure. I never intended to divorce you. That part wasn't a lie." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about intentions versus actions, about the relationship that had seemed so promising at the start. Perhaps Ryan had loved me once. Perhaps he'd meant well with the prenup clause. But good intentions couldn't erase the harm he and Margaret had done. The following week, I received notification that the police had formally charged Ryan with financial fraud. The amounts weren't large enough for him to face jail time, but he would have a criminal record and likely face probation and restitution payments. Margaret, while implicated, wasn't charged. There wasn't enough evidence that she had actively participated in the theft, rather than just benefiting from it. As spring turned to summer, the scandal gradually faded from public interest. Ryan found a job waiting tables at a casual restaurant chain, a far cry from his former position at the prestigious consulting firm. Margaret, from what I heard, had become a virtual recluse, rarely leaving Ryan's tiny apartment. And me? I was finally ready to close this chapter of my life and move forward. The divorce was finalized on a bright September morning, exactly 3 years and 2 months after our wedding. I wore a simple blue dress to the courthouse, feeling strangely ceremonial about the occasion. This was, in many ways, as significant as a wedding, the official end of one life and the beginning of another. Ryan attended with his public defender, looking thin and subdued in a suit that hung loosely on his frame. Margaret was notably absent. "The paperwork is in order," the judge noted, reviewing our agreement. "Mr. Taylor has waived all claims to marital assets as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement. Ms. Williams has agreed to waive any claim to restitution beyond the criminal case resolution." I had indeed made that concession. After calculating what Ryan had stolen and what pursuing him further would cost in legal fees and emotional energy, I decided a clean break was worth more than the money. "If both parties are in agreement, I'll approve this divorce decree," the judge continued. "You'll receive the official documentation within 10 business days." And just like that, it was over. I was no longer Amelia Taylor, returning to Amelia Williams in name as well as spirit. Ryan approached me as we left the courtroom. "So, that's it," he said quietly. "That's it," I confirmed. "How's your mother?" Shadow crossed his face. "Not good. She's depressed, won't get out of bed most days. The doctor prescribed medication, but she says it makes her foggy." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything Margaret had done, I wouldn't wish depression on anyone. "I should go," Ryan said, glancing at his watch. "My shift starts at noon." As I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped under the weight of his new reality, I felt the last of my anger dissolve. Not forgiveness. I would never forget what they had tried to do to me, but a release. They no longer had the power to hurt me, physically or emotionally. Outside the courthouse, Jessica waited in her car to drive me home. "How do you feel?" she asked, as I slid into the passenger seat. I considered the question carefully. Free, I finally answered, and ready for what's next. What came next was a solo trip to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do, but Ryan had repeatedly dismissed as impractical or boring. For 3 glorious weeks, I wandered through ancient streets, ate gelato for breakfast, and sketched designs, inspired by Renaissance art and architecture. I visited small villages where local artisans crafted jewelry, using techniques passed down through generations, absorbing their knowledge and perspective. In a small workshop in Florence, I met Elisa, a third-generation silversmith whose delicate filigree work took my breath away. We spent hours discussing techniques and design philosophy, communicating through my broken Italian and her limited English. By the end of my stay, we had drafted plans for a collaboration, her traditional techniques applied to my contemporary designs. "You must come back," she insisted as we parted. "This is just the beginning." She was right, though neither of us knew how significant that beginning would be. The Italy-inspired collection I launched upon my return became my most successful line yet, attracting attention from high-end retailers and fashion magazines. Williams Custom Designs expanded to a 5th location, and my online sales doubled. With success came new challenges and opportunities. A major department store offered me a featured designer spot with a substantial advance payment. A fashion conglomerate approached me about acquiring my brand, which I politely but firmly declined. I was finally building something entirely on my terms. I wasn't about to surrender control. As my business flourished, I found myself thinking about the future in broader terms. I began mentoring young women entrepreneurs, particularly those from backgrounds like mine who lacked traditional advantages. I established a small scholarship fund for students pursuing design and business education, naming it after my mother. "You've turned poison into medicine," my therapist observed during one of our sessions. I had finally started therapy 6 months after the divorce, recognizing that professional help would benefit my healing process. "I suppose I have," I agreed. "But I still have trust issues to work through." Those trust issues were tested when I met Daniel at a charity auction 9 months after my divorce. He was an architect specializing in sustainable design, with kind eyes and an easy laugh. When he asked for my number, my first instinct was refusal. "I should warn you," I said instead. "I'm recently divorced and not looking for anything serious." "How? About just coffee, then?" he suggested. "No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 adults enjoying conversation." Coffee turned into dinner, which turned into weekend hikes and art gallery visits. Daniel was everything Ryan wasn't: secure in himself, supportive of my success, and completely transparent about his life, including his own past relationship failures. I proceeded cautiously, keeping emotional barriers firmly in place. "You're waiting for me to reveal some hidden agenda," he observed after we'd been dating for 2 months. "It's okay to admit that." "Am I that obvious?" I asked, embarrassed. "Only to someone paying attention," he replied gently. "Look, I know what happened with your ex-husband. It made the business pages, remember? I understand why you're cautious. And it doesn't bother you, dating someone with that kind of baggage?" He considered this thoughtfully. "We all have baggage, Amelia. What matters is how we carry it. You didn't let your experience break you or make you bitter. That says more about you than the divorce ever could." Slowly, hesitantly, I allowed myself to open up to the possibility of trust again. Not blind trust. I would never again be naive about protecting myself and my business, but measured trust based on consistent actions rather than charming words. Meanwhile, echoes of my past occasionally surfaced. Margaret attempted to rebuild her social standing by joining a different church congregation in a neighboring town, presenting herself as a widow rather than a divorcee with a disgraced son. When her deception was discovered, she was once again ostracized. Ryan fared somewhat better. He enrolled in night classes at a community college, studying hospitality management, a field where his natural charm could be an asset rather than a means of manipulation. We occasionally crossed paths at business events, exchanging polite but distant greetings. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was dating someone new, a waitress at the restaurant where he worked. I sincerely hoped he had learned enough to treat her better than he had treated me. 13 months after our divorce, Ryan called me out of the blue. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "I wanted to let you know that Mom had a stroke," he said without preamble. "The doctors say she'll recover, but she'll need ongoing care." "I'm very sorry to hear that," I replied, surprised by the news. "Is there anything I can do?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not why I called. I just thought you should know. And I wanted to tell you that I'm selling Mom's house, what's left of it after the bank took their share. I'm using the money to pay you back." This caught me off guard. "You don't have to do that, Ryan. The courts didn't order full restitution." "I know," he said quietly. "But I need to. For me, not for you. I need to fix what I can." After we hung up, I sat on my patio, watching the sunset and reflecting on how different my life had become in just over a year. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead forced me to become stronger, more self-reliant, and ultimately more successful. 2 weeks later, I received a certified check for $42,000, not the full amount Ryan had taken, but clearly everything he could manage from the sale of Margaret's remaining assets. I deposited it, not in my personal account, but in the scholarship fund I had established. Something good should come from that money at last. As my second post-divorce year began, I made a significant decision: to sell my house and buy a new one in a different neighborhood. The home I had shared with Ryan held too many memories, both good and bad. It was time for a completely fresh start. The house I found was smaller, but architecturally unique, with large windows that flooded the space with natural light, and a studio perfect for my design work. Daniel helped me renovate it, bringing his architectural expertise to maximize the space and sustainability. "You could move in with me, you know," I said one evening as we painted the kitchen together, "if you wanted to." He looked up, surprised by the offer. "Are you sure? That's a big step." "I'm sure that I want to try," I replied honestly. "I can't promise I won't have moments of doubt or fear, but I don't want fear to dictate my choices anymore." He set down his paintbrush and pulled me into an embrace, careful not to get paint on my clothes. "Then let's try together." It wasn't always smooth. I had moments of panic, irrational fears that Daniel would turn out to be another Ryan in disguise. He had his own insecurities about living in a home I owned outright, about the income disparity between us. But unlike my marriage, this relationship was built on honest communication. We talked through our fears instead of letting them fester. My business continued to thrive. The collaboration with Elisa and Florence expanded into a full European distribution network. I opened a 6th storefront and hired a COO to manage daily operations, giving me more time to focus on design and strategic growth. Fashion magazines described Williams' custom designs as the emerging American luxury brand to watch. Margaret's stroke had greater long-term effects than initially predicted. She required more care than Ryan could provide while working full-time, eventually necessitating a move to an assisted living facility. When he couldn't afford the monthly fees, he swallowed his pride and reached out to his mother's estranged sister in Pennsylvania, who agreed to help. I learned this not from Ryan directly, but from Linda, who remained our connection to gossip from the old neighborhood. "He's actually handling it better than I expected," she reported. "Working hard, taking care of his mother. It's like he finally grew up." "Sometimes people need to lose everything to find themselves," I replied. "Speaking of finding yourself," Linda said with a knowing smile, "when are you and Daniel making things official?" I laughed, deflecting the question. Marriage wasn't in my immediate plans, though I no longer ruled it out entirely. If it happened, it would be on my terms, with proper legal protections in place, not out of fear or distrust, but because I had learned the value of securing what I had built. On the second anniversary of my divorce, I took myself out to dinner at the restaurant where Ryan and I had our first date. Not out of nostalgia, but as a symbolic reclaiming of my narrative. As I sipped a glass of excellent Cabernet, I reflected on how far I had come. The scared, devastated woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, even toward herself. I had survived the storm not just intact, but transformed. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Hope your solo dinner is going well. There's cheesecake in the fridge when you get home." Home. Such a simple word for such a profound concept. Not just a place, but a feeling of safety, of belonging, of peace. I had created that for myself, brick by brick, choice by choice. "Ready for dessert, Ms. Williams?" the waiter asked, appearing at my table. "No, thank you," I replied with a smile. "I have something waiting for me at home." 3 years after my divorce from Ryan, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. My relationship with Daniel had grown stronger, built on mutual respect and honest communication. My business had expanded to 8 locations across the East Coast, with a growing international presence. I had finally found the peace I deserved, or so I thought. The first hint of trouble came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon as I worked in my home studio, sketching designs for our upcoming fall collection. My assistant, Megan, called with an unusual message. "Amelia, I just got the strangest email," she said, her voice tense. "It's from a reporter at the Boston Globe asking for comment on allegations of design theft." I set down my pencil, instantly alert. Design theft? What allegations? According to the email, someone has claimed you stole designs from independent artists for your Italy collection. They have evidence they're planning to publish. My heart raced. The Italy collection had been entirely my own work, inspired by traditional techniques I'd learned from Elisa in Florence. I had the original sketches, dated and signed, documenting the evolution of every piece. "Send me the email," I said, "and don't respond yet." The reporter's message was vague but threatening, mentioning multiple sources and compelling evidence of intellectual property theft. They wanted my comment within 24 hours before going to press. I called my lawyer immediately. "Someone's trying to smear me," I explained. "I need to know who's behind this." The answer came sooner than expected. That evening, Daniel brought in the mail, including a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a printed note. $50,000. Sent to this account in 48 hours or the story runs. Below was a Bitcoin wallet address. "Blackmail," Daniel said, his face darkening. "Should we call the police?" I studied the note, a cold certainty settling in my chest. "Not yet. I think I know who's behind this." The next morning, I had Megan cancel my appointments and drove to a part of town I hadn't visited in years. Ryan's apartment building was even more depressing than I'd imagined. Peeling paint, security doors with broken locks, overflowing trash bins in the side alley. I double-checked the address I'd gotten from a mutual acquaintance and climbed the stairs to apartment 3B. The hallway smelled of stale cooking oil and cigarettes. I knocked firmly on the door. Footsteps approached, followed by a pause. Someone looking through the peephole. Then the door opened to reveal Ryan, his appearance shocking me into momentary silence. The handsome, confident man I'd married was gone. This Ryan was gaunt, his once perfect hair now thinning and gray at the temples, despite being only 38. He wore wrinkled khakis and a faded polo shirt with a restaurant logo embroidered on the chest. "Amelia?" he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "What are you doing here?" I held up the blackmail note. "I think you know." His confusion appeared genuine as he studied the paper. I don't understand. What is this? Don't play innocent, I said, pushing past him into the apartment. It was small but surprisingly neat, a studio with minimal furniture and bare walls. Design theft accusations, Bitcoin blackmail, it has your fingerprints all over it. Ryan shut the door, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. I swear I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't contacted you in over a year. I scanned the apartment for evidence, a computer, printouts, anything connecting him to the scheme. There was nothing but a basic laptop on a small desk, in the corner. If not you, then who? I demanded. Who else would try to extort money from me with false accusations? Ryan ran a hand through his thinning hair. Mom, he said quietly. I stared at him. Margaret, she can barely take care of herself after the stroke. Her physical recovery has been better than expected, Ryan replied, gesturing for me to sit on the single armchair while he perched on the edge of the bed. But her mental state, she's obsessed with what happened. With you. She blames you for everything, the foreclosure, the social rejection, my job loss, even her stroke. And you think she's capable of orchestrating blackmail? Ryan sighed deeply. 3 weeks ago, she convinced her nurse to bring her a laptop. Said she wanted to play bridge online with old friends. I thought it was a good sign, her reconnecting with people. But she doesn't have friends anymore. Just grudges. The pieces started falling into place. Where is she now? At Golden Oaks Assisted Living, Ryan replied. I moved her there 6 months ago when I couldn't afford the previous place anymore. It's not what she was used to. I leaned forward. Ryan, I need you to be honest with me. Did you know anything about this? He met my gaze directly. No, and I'll help you prove it. Mom's gone too far this time. Within an hour, we were at Golden Oaks, a modest but clean facility in a middle-class suburb. Ryan led me to Margaret's room, knocking before entering. Mom, you have a visitor. Margaret sat by the window in a wheelchair, a blanket across her lap despite the warm spring day. She looked up as we entered, her face transforming from mild interest to shock, then rage as she recognized me. You, she hissed, her voice slurred slightly from the stroke's lasting effects. Get out. You're not welcome here. I stepped forward, holding up the blackmail note. Is this your work, Margaret? Her eyes darted to the paper, then away too quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. Mom, Ryan said, his voice firm but gentle. Did you send this? Did you contact a reporter about Amelia? So what if I did? Margaret suddenly snapped, her face flushing. She deserves it. She took everything from us. Ryan looked stricken. Mom, we've talked about this. Amelia didn't take anything. I stole from her. I tried to frame her. Remember? You were manipulated, Margaret insisted, her right hand clutching the wheelchair armrest. She trapped you with that prenup, turned you against your own mother. I watched this exchange with a strange detachment, recognizing the desperate flailing of someone who couldn't accept reality. Margaret had constructed an alternate version of events where she and Ryan were the victims, and nothing would shake that belief. The reporter won't publish without evidence, I said calmly. And there is no evidence, because I didn't steal any designs. This scheme won't work, Margaret. She smiled then, a chilling expression on her pale face. There's evidence. Now. I paid someone to create it. Emails, backdated sketches, testimony from a former assistant who doesn't exist. It won't hold up forever, but it will damage you. Create doubt. Tarnish your precious reputation. Ryan looked horrified. Mom, that's fraud. You could go to jail. Who'll believe a stroke-addled old woman meant any harm? Margaret replied suddenly, playing up her disability. I'm confused. Forgetful. My son takes care of me because I can't manage on my own." The calculation in her eyes belied her words. Margaret was diminished but far from confused. She knew exactly what she was doing. How? "Did you pay for this?" I asked, suddenly curious about the logistics. "You don't have money." Margaret's smile faltered. "I still have friends." "No, you don't," Ryan corrected gently. "Your sister sends money for your care, but that's it. Who helped you, Mom?" After a moment's hesitation, Margaret admitted, "Howard Lewis." Ryan groaned. "Mom's former neighbor," he explained to me. "He always had a crush on her. He's not wealthy, but he has a decent pension." "You convinced him to fund a blackmail scheme?" I asked Margaret. She lifted her chin defiantly. "I told him I needed to fight a legal injustice. He was happy to help. A lady in distress." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police." "Wait," Ryan interjected. "Please. She's not well. The stress of an arrest could trigger another stroke." I looked between them. Ryan, beaten down by years of struggle but still trying to protect his mother. Margaret, defiant and unrepentant, despite everything. "I won't press charges on one condition," I said finally. "You contact this reporter immediately, admit the allegations are false, and reveal that you created fake evidence." "Never," Margaret spat. "Then I call the police," I replied, finger hovering over my phone. Ryan knelt beside his mother's wheelchair. "Mom, please, this has to stop. We can't keep living in the past. You need to let this go. Let Amelia go, for—" A moment, Margaret's mask slipped, revealing the depth of her despair. "What else do I have, Ryan? My home is gone. My friends are gone. My health is gone. Hating her is all I have left." The raw pain in her voice would have moved me 3 years ago. Now I recognized it as emotional manipulation, her specialty. "That's not true," Ryan said softly. "You have me. But if you do this, if you commit fraud and blackmail, I can't protect you anymore." The final threat, losing her son's support, seemed to penetrate Margaret's defenses. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Fine," she muttered. "I'll contact the reporter." Under our supervision, Margaret composed an email confessing that she had fabricated the allegations and created false evidence. She revealed the name of the person she'd hired to create the fake materials and admitted her motivation was revenge. As she hit send, she looked up at me with undisguised hatred. "Happy now? You've taken everything, even my final attempt at justice." "This wasn't justice, Margaret," I replied evenly. "It was vengeance. There's a difference." As we left the facility, Ryan walked me to my car, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I had no idea she was planning this." "I believe you," I replied, surprising myself with the realization that I did. The Ryan I'd married would have been an eager participant in the scheme. This Ryan looked ashamed of his mother's actions. "What happens now?" he asked. "I'll have my lawyer contact the person who created the fake evidence. Make sure it's all destroyed." "After that," I shrugged. "Nothing. It's over." Ryan nodded, looking relieved and devastated simultaneously. "I should never have let her keep that laptop." "She would have found another way," I said, not unkindly. "Margaret doesn't give up easily." "No," he agreed with a sad smile. "That's where you're alike." I bristled at the comparison, but let it pass. "Take care of yourself, Ryan." "You too, Amelia." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're doing well. Your success was always your own. I see that now." As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Ryan stood in the parking lot, a solitary figure watching me leave. Not with anger or resentment, but with something that looked like acceptance. That evening, I told Daniel everything. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you where I was going this morning. I finished. I needed to handle it myself. He took my hands in his. You don't have to face these things alone anymore, Amelia. That's what partnership means, but I understand why you did. Do you think it's really over? I asked. Margaret's final, desperate attempt? Daniel considered this thoughtfully. I think Margaret will always blame you for her downfall, but her ability to act on that blame is diminishing, and Ryan seems to have finally broken free of her influence. Nodded, absorbing his perspective. You're right. It feels different this time. Like the final gasp of something that's been dying for years. The reporter never published the story. Margaret's confession email had been thorough enough to discredit the entire premise. The design thief who'd created the fake evidence, when confronted by my lawyer, quickly surrendered all materials and signed a non-disclosure agreement rather than face potential legal consequences. 2 weeks later, Ryan called to tell me Margaret had suffered another, more severe stroke. This time, the prognosis was grim. The doctors say she might not recover consciousness, he said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. I thought you should know. I'm sorry, I replied, meaning it. Despite everything Margaret had done, I wouldn't wish such suffering on anyone. Do you need anything? No, but thank you for asking. He paused, then added, if she does wake up, she likely won't remember the blackmail attempt. The doctors say memory loss is almost certain. Maybe that's for the best, I suggested. A fresh start, in a way. Maybe, Ryan agreed, though he didn't sound convinced. Margaret lingered in a semi-conscious state for 3 more weeks before passing away quietly in her sleep. Ryan called to inform me, his voice steady but drained. There won't be a funeral, he explained. No one would come. I'm having her cremated, then taking her ashes to the beach. She loved the ocean. Would you like company? I offered, surprising myself. That's kind, but no, he declined gently. This is something I need to do alone. But thank you, Amelia, for everything. After we hung up, I sat on my patio, watching the sunset and reflecting on the complicated tangle of emotions Margaret's death evoked. Not grief. I could never mourn the woman who had tried repeatedly to destroy me. But there was a sense of closure, of a chapter finally ending. The next day, I wrote a check to Golden Oaks Assisted Living, covering Margaret's outstanding balance, and including a small additional amount for their patient activities fund, not out of obligation or guilt, but because it felt like the right thing to do, a final gesture to close the account, so to speak. That weekend, as Daniel and I walked along the shore of a secluded beach, I told him about Ryan's plan to scatter his mother's ashes over the ocean. Do you think he's really free of her influence? Now? Daniel asked. I considered this, watching the waves roll in and retreat. I think he's trying to be. That's all any of us can do with painful pasts. Try to move beyond them. Daniel squeezed my hand. You've certainly managed it. I smiled, up at him. I had help. As we walked back toward the car, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for months. Let's get married, I said simply. Daniel stopped, turning to face me with surprise and joy lighting his features. Are you sure? Completely, I replied. With a proper prenup, of course. He laughed, pulling me into an embrace. Of course, I wouldn't have it any other way. 3 months later, we received an unexpected package. Inside was a handcrafted wooden box containing a set of rare architectural drawings Daniel had once mentioned admiring. The note read simply, "Congratulations on your engagement. I hope these bring you joy. Ryan." How did he know we were engaged? Daniel wondered, carefully examining the valuable prints. I smiled, thinking of the small announcement that had run in the business section of the Boston Globe the previous week. Word gets around, and Ryan always did pay attention to details when they mattered. It was the last contact we had with Ryan Taylor. I heard through mutual connections that he eventually moved to North Carolina, started his own modest restaurant, and built a quiet life far from Boston's social circles and painful memories. As for me, I move forward, stronger and wiser for having weathered the storm. On a perfect autumn day, 5 years after my divorce from Ryan, I stood in the entryway of my dream home, watching as movers carried in the last of our furniture. The sprawling Cape Cod with its wraparound porch and ocean view had been on the market for less than a day when I made an offer, significantly above asking price to prevent any counteroffers. "What do you think?" I asked Daniel, who emerged from directing the placement of his drafting table in the sunroom we designated as his workspace. "It's perfect," he replied, slipping an arm around my waist. "Though I still think we could have negotiated that price down a bit." I laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Some things are worth paying full price for. This place is exactly what I've been dreaming of since I was a kid." And it was. Growing up in a trailer park, I'd cut pictures of houses like this from magazines, creating collages of the life I someday hope to have. Now, at 38, I had created that life through my own determination and talent. Williams Custom Designs had grown into Williams Design House, an internationally recognized brand with 15 locations across North America and Europe. My collaboration with Elisa in Florence had expanded into a full Italian subsidiary, bringing traditional craftsmanship to contemporary designs. We'd been featured in Vogue, Elle, and Harper's Bazaar, with celebrities regularly wearing my pieces on red carpets. More importantly, I had found personal happiness that complemented my professional success. Daniel and I had been married for 18 months, a small, intimate ceremony on the beach, followed by a honeymoon in Japan, where I found inspiration for our upcoming spring collection. "Mrs. Chen for you," my assistant called from the doorway, holding out my phone. Elisa had married the previous year, taking her husband's name. "Elisa. How's Milan?" I greeted her, switching to the Italian I'd been diligently studying. "Magnifico," she replied enthusiastically. "The buyers are loving the new collection. We've already received orders from 3 major department stores." "That's fantastic news," I said, making a mental note to send her team a celebration gift. "Email me the details and we'll discuss expansion plans on our call next week." After we hung up, I turned to find Daniel watching me with an amused expression. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied. "I just love seeing you in your element, confident, powerful, speaking Italian." I smiled, feeling a comfortable warmth spread through me. This was what security felt like, not just financial stability, but emotional safety. The knowledge that I was loved for exactly who I was, not for what I could provide. That evening, as we shared a bottle of wine on our new porch, watching the sunset over the ocean, Daniel brought up a topic we'd been discussing for months. "I spoke with the adoption agency today," he said. "Our home study is scheduled for next month." My heart raced with nervous excitement. "So soon? That's wonderful." We had decided to adopt rather than pursue biological children, both feeling drawn to providing a home for a child who needed one. After much discussion, we'd specified a willingness to adopt siblings or older children, who typically waited longer for placement. "They mentioned a possibility," Daniel continued carefully. "A brother and sister, 8 and 6. Their mother passed away recently, and there's no father in the picture." "Tell me about them," I said, already feeling a connection to these children I hadn't yet met. As Daniel shared what little information the agency had provided, I found myself envisioning them in this house, running along the beach, having breakfast at the large kitchen island, filling the space with laughter and life. "What do you think?" Daniel asked when he'd finished. "I think we should meet them," I replied without hesitation. "If it feels right, this could be our family." He squeezed my hand, his eyes suspiciously bright in the fading light. "I think so too." The following week brought another milestone: the publication of my memoir, Designing Resilience: How I Built a Life on My Own Terms. I'd worked on it secretly for over a year, finally sharing the manuscript with Daniel when it was nearly complete. "Are you sure you want to tell this story?" he'd asked after reading it. "It's very personal." "That's precisely why I need to tell it," I'd replied. So many women stay in bad situations because they're afraid of what comes after. I want them to see that what comes after can be better than anything they imagined. The book detailed my journey from the trailer park to business success, including an unflinching account of my marriage to Ryan and Margaret's attempts to destroy me. I changed their names, not out of kindness, but because they had become irrelevant to my story. The memoir focused on resilience, on rebuilding, on defining success on my own terms. To my surprise, the book became an instant bestseller. I found myself fielding requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and even a potential documentary. The story seemed to resonate particularly with women who'd faced their own versions of betrayal and manipulation. "Your phone's been ringing nonstop," Daniel observed one evening as I declined yet another call. "Apparently people find my life interesting," I replied with a laugh. "Who would have thought?" "I always found it interesting," he said, pulling me close. "From the moment you showed me your designs and told me about building your business from scratch." My publicity tour took me across the country, speaking at universities, business schools, and women's leadership conferences. I established a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, using proceeds from the book to fund scholarships and startup grants. Through it all, I remained centered on what truly mattered: my relationship with Daniel, our adoption process, and the creative work that still brought me joy after all these years. 6 months after moving into our dream home, we welcomed Lily and James into our family. The adoption process had moved faster than expected once we met the children and formed an immediate connection. They were bright, resilient kids who had faced more loss in their short lives than anyone should have to endure. "This is your home, now," I told them on their first night with us, showing them the rooms we'd prepared based on their favorite colors and interests. "For always." "Even if we mess up?" James asked, his 8-year-old face serious. "Especially then," Daniel assured him. "Families stick together through mistakes." Lily, the 6-year-old, studied me with solemn eyes. "My mom used to make jewelry too, but just for fun." I knelt to her level. "Would you like to learn how to make some? I have a special workbench just your size in my studio." Her face lit up, with the first genuine smile we'd seen. "Yes, please." Integrating the children into our lives brought challenges along with immeasurable joy. There were nightmares, testing of boundaries, and moments of grief as they processed their mother's death. But there were also beach picnics, bedtime stories, and the gradual blooming of trust. I scaled back my work travel, prioritizing stability for our new family. Instead of constant expansion, I focused on sustainable growth, developing a management structure that didn't require my daily presence. Daniel transitioned to working primarily from home, his architectural practice thriving through careful client selection rather than volume. One bright spring morning, as the children played on the beach below our house, I received an unexpected email. It was from Jessica, my old friend who had moved to California years ago. "Thought you might find this interesting," she wrote. "Spotted in a local paper here in San Francisco." The attached article was about a small but acclaimed restaurant that had opened in the city's North Beach neighborhood. The owner's chef, Ryan Taylor, had relocated from North Carolina after his modest eatery there had gained a following for its authentic Italian cuisine. Taylor credits his success to lessons learned through failure, the article quoted. "I lost everything once, including my integrity. Starting over meant building not just a business, but a life I could be proud of." The accompanying photo showed a Ryan I barely recognized, gray-haired but healthy-looking, standing confidently in a chef's coat. There was a simple dignity to him that had been absent in the Ryan I knew. I closed the email without responding. To Jessica. There was nothing to say. Ryan had found his path, just as I had found mine. Our stories had intersected painfully once, but now ran parallel, separate, but perhaps both heading toward redemption in different forms. That evening, as our family gathered for dinner on the porch, I looked around at the life I had built. Daniel, carving a roast chicken, James setting the table with careful precision, Lily arranging wildflowers in a vase she had painted herself. Beyond them, the ocean stretched to the horizon, constant yet ever-changing. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noticing my momentary abstraction. "Perfect," I replied, meaning it completely. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Later, after the children were asleep, Daniel and I sat on the porch swing, enjoying the night air and the sound of waves breaking on the shore. "I got a call from the adoption agency today," he said. "They wanted to check how things are going with Lily and James." "What did you tell them?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "That we couldn't imagine our lives without them," he replied, smiling. "That this family feels like it was always meant to be." I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling a profound contentment wash over me. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been? If I hadn't caught Ryan stealing, if I hadn't prepared for their betrayal?" Daniel considered this thoughtfully. "Sometimes, but then I think that you would have found your way regardless. That strength was always in you. Circumstances just revealed it. His faith in me, unwavering and based on who I truly was, rather than what I could provide, still felt like a miracle after years together." "We should invite your parents for Thanksgiving," I said, changing the subject to happier thoughts. "The kids adore your mother." "She adores them right back," Daniel laughed. "Dad's already talking about teaching James to fish off the pier." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, planning holidays, discussing Lily's upcoming dance recital, debating whether to add a dog to our family. The ordinary, precious concerns of a life built on love and trust, rather than manipulation and control. As we finally headed inside, I paused for one last look at the ocean. Dark and vast under the star-filled sky, I thought briefly of Margaret, whose ashes had returned to these same waters. Of Ryan, finding his own path to redemption 3,000 miles away. Of the frightened, betrayed woman I had been, and the resilient, fulfilled woman I had become. There was a time when my story had been defined by what was done to me. Now it was defined by what I had built from those broken pieces: a business, a family, a life of purpose and joy. My mother-in-law had indeed demanded I leave her son alone. In doing so, she had inadvertently set me free to create a life beyond anything Margaret, with her limited vision and smaller ambitions, could have imagined. I closed the door on the night, turning toward the warmth of the home I had created. Not just a house or a family, but a sanctuary built on my own terms, secured by my own strength, and filled with the love I had always deserved. This was my final victory. This was my future. This was my life, designed entirely by me. What would you do if the people who vowed to love you plotted your destruction instead? Would you have the courage to not just survive their betrayal, but to thrive beyond it? If Amelia's journey from betrayal to triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, and share in the comments how you've turned your own setbacks into strength.